The rain was falling over London when a judge and his son crossed paths with truth and danger. A dark alley, 3 hooded men, and a briefcase containing evidence that could bring down a political empire. The boy flees in despair, and a mysterious street girl emerges to save the life that was hanging by a thread. But what seemed like a chance encounter reveals itself to be the beginning of a plot that could change the destiny of an entire country. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. Will continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The rain lashed the streets of London that winter night. The black, starless sky seemed to weep over the city that never sleeps. On Oxford Street, the lights of commercial buildings reflected in the puddles formed on the asphalt, creating a spectacle of colours that contrasted with the harshness of the concrete. Julian Stone, a respected federal judge aged 45, hurried along under his black umbrella. He had just come from a tense meeting with an informant who had handed him compromising documents about a corruption scheme involving important figures in the county government. His heart pounded, not just from the brisk walk, but from the gravity of the information he carried in his leather briefcase. "Dad, do you think it will work out?" asked Matthew, his 10-year-old son, who was accompanying him that exceptional night. The boy had met his father after a piano lesson nearby. "It will work out, son. It always does when we do what's right," Julian replied, squeezing the boy's small hand firmly. They decided to cut through a less busy street to get to the parking lot where they had left the car more quickly. It was a mistake. As they turned into a dimly lit alley, 3 men emerged from the shadows. They wore dark clothes and their faces were partially covered. "Judge Julian Stone, and what a coincidence to find you here," said the tallest of them, his voice more like a growl. "Who are you? What do you want?" Julian put Matthew behind him in a protective gesture. "We just want to talk about certain documents that came into your hands today," the man replied, taking a step forward. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Let us pass," Julian demanded, trying to maintain his composure despite the growing fear. Everything happened very quickly. One of the men grabbed Julian's briefcase, while another violently shoved him against the wall. The judge hit his head and fell to the wet ground. The third man advanced towards him. "Run, Matthew, run!" Julian shouted, seeing his son paralyzed with fear. The boy, seized by panic, obeyed. He ran as he had never run before, tears mixing with the rain that was now falling harder. His small feet splashed in the puddles, soaking his private school uniform trousers. He didn't know where to go. He just ran, away from the alley, from the danger, from his father fallen on the ground. After a few minutes that felt like hours, Matthew stopped, gasping for breath. He was lost in an area he didn't know, far from the bright lights of Oxford Street. It was a simpler neighborhood, with old buildings and broken pavements. The rain continued relentlessly. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" The soft voice startled him. Matthew turned quickly, ready to run. Again, but what he saw made him stop. Under the awning of a closed shop, huddled with an old backpack and a thin blanket, was a girl. She seemed half his size, with dark, curly hair framing a thin face with large brown eyes that looked much older than the body they inhabited. "My dad, some men, he needs help," Matthew sobbed, his words coming out brokenly. The girl jumped up, revealing herself to be even smaller than she looked. She wore a faded hoodie several sizes too big for her, worn-out jeans and torn trainers. "Where is—" "Hey?" she asked, with an impressive seriousness for someone so small. "In the alley near Oxford Street, that narrow street after the big bank. I know where that is. Let's go," she said, grabbing her backpack and running in the indicated direction, not caring about the rain that was now drenching her clothes. Matthew followed her, surprised by the girl's determination. In a few minutes, guided by the girl's instinct, who seemed to know every shortcut in the city, they arrived at the alley. Julian was lying on the ground, a head wound bleeding. The men had vanished with his briefcase. "Dad!" Matthew cried, running to him. "Don't touch him," the girl ordered, stopping him. "You might make the injury worse." With surprising dexterity, she opened her backpack and took out a small, improvised first aid kit, some clean compresses, a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, bandages. Her small hands worked with precision, first checking Julian's vital signs, then cleaning the wound. Where did you learn to do that?" Matthew asked, watching in astonishment. My dad was an NHS paramedic, she replied without taking her eyes off her work. He taught me a few things. He's unconscious, but his breathing is normal. The cut is deep, but it doesn't seem to have affected anything serious. The girl tore a piece of her own blanket and made an improvised dressing, stopping the bleeding. Then she pulled an old broken mobile phone from her pocket. It doesn't work anymore, but I can still call emergency services, she explained, dialing 999. In a clear voice, she reported the exact location and the judge's condition. While they waited, the girl kept Julian stabilized, constantly checking his vital signs and adjusting the dressing when necessary. Matthew watched, admiring the competence and calmness of the unknown girl. What's your name? He asked. B, she replied briefly. And you? Matthew. And my dad is Judge Julian Stone. Something in the girl's gaze changed when she heard the name. It seemed a mixture of recognition and fear. Federal judge? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Matthew nodded, confused by her reaction. B seemed to become even more alert, looking nervously at the alley entrances. In the distance, they heard the ambulance siren approaching. B finished adjusting the dressing and quickly stood up. They'll take good care of your dad now, she said, gathering her things. Wait, where are you going? You can't stay in the rain. I'm used to it, she replied with a sad smile. I'd better go before the ambulance arrives. But why? You saved my dad. They need to know. You should come with us to the hospital. B shook her head. I can't. I have my reasons. She hesitated for a moment, then took something from her pocket and handed it to Matthew. It was a small pendant with a blue stone. For good luck. Your dad will be fine. Before Matthew could insist, the girl disappeared, running down the alley, vanishing into the darkness of the rainy night. Seconds later, the ambulance rounded the corner, its red lights illuminating the scene. As the paramedics attended to Julian, Matthew stared fixedly in the direction B had disappeared, the small blue pendant clutched in his hand. Who was that mysterious girl? Why did she live on the streets? And how did she know so much about first aid? At that moment, as he climbed into the ambulance beside his unconscious father, Matthew swore to himself that he would find B again. Not just to thank her, but because something in those ancient eyes, in such a young face, had touched him deeply. The ambulance sped off towards the hospital, leaving behind only the echo of its siren and the mystery of a little anonymous heroine who now watched everything from a distance, hidden in the shadows, her heart pounding, and a secret she carried like a burden too heavy for her fragile shoulders. The white lights of St. Thomas's Hospital reflected on the pale face of Julian Stone, who remained unconscious in an intensive care unit bed. Heart monitors emitted constant beeps, marking the federal judge's heartbeat. Beside him, Matthew watched his father with eyes red from crying, clutching the small blue pendant B had given him. He's going to be okay, son, said Claire Stone, Matthew's mother, as she stroked the boy's hair. Claire was a renowned architect, with discreet beauty and natural elegance. Despite her worried expression, she tried to convey reassurance to her son. It was B who saved Dad, Mum, Matthew repeated for the 10th time since they had arrived at the hospital. If it weren't for her, he might have... His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I know, darling, and we'll find that girl to thank her, Claire promised, hugging her son. Inside, she felt a mixture of gratitude for the mysterious girl and horror at the thought of a child living on the streets. The room door opened, and Detective Inspector Rachel Owens entered. She was a black woman, middle-aged, with a firm posture and keen eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Mrs. Stone, may we speak for a moment? The inspector asked, and perhaps your son can tell me exactly what happened. Claire nodded, and the three went to a small private waiting room. Matthew recounted the events of that night, his father's meeting, the attack in the alley, his desperate escape, the encounter with B, and the impressive way the girl had helped his father. And you say this girl B lives on the streets? The inspector asked, making notes. Yes. She was sleeping under an awning with a torn blanket, Matthew confirmed, his voice choked. But she had a first aid kit in her backpack and knew exactly what to do. She said her dad was with the NHS ambulance service. The inspector raised her eyebrows, intrigued. NHS ambulance service? Interesting. Inspector, do you believe the attack on my husband is related to the case he's investigating? Claire asked, keeping her voice low so Matthew wouldn't be even more frightened. It's premature to say, but considering they only took the briefcase with documents and not other valuables, yes, it seems plausible, Rachel replied thoughtfully. We need to wait for Judge Stone to wake up to give us more details. 3 days passed. News of the attack on the federal judge responsible for corruption cases resonated in the media. Journalists gathered at the hospital entrance awaiting updates on Julian Stone's health. On the morning of the 4th day, Julian finally awoke. Confused, he looked around, recognizing the hospital environment. Claire, Matthew, he called in a hoarse voice. We're here, love, Claire replied, quickly approaching the bed, with Matthew right behind her. What happened? Julian asked, trying to sit up. Don't strain yourself, Claire advised. You were attacked after your meeting. You hit your head and were unconscious for a few days. Julian frowned, struggling to remember. I was with Matthew. We were going back to the car. Then he shook his head, frustrated. I can't remember the attack or the faces. The doctors said that can happen. They call it traumatic amnesia, Claire explained. Dad, do you remember the girl? Matthew asked anxiously. Girl? What girl? Julian seemed genuinely confused. Matthew told his father about B, describing in detail how the girl had administered first aid and called the ambulance, saving his life. He showed him the blue pendant she had given him. We need to find her, Dad. She saved your life and she's living on the street. Julian Stone looked at his son with tenderness. He had always admired the boy's generous heart, so different from the coldness he himself had developed over years of dealing with the worst aspects of human nature in courtrooms. We'll find her, son, I promise. Julian's recovery was surprisingly quick. Doctors attributed it to the efficient first aid he received at the scene of the attack. After a week, he was discharged from the hospital, though he still needed rest at home. Inspector Owens visited them at their residence in Kensington, a spacious house with well-kept gardens, surrounded by high walls and security systems. The situation had become more serious. The stolen documents contained evidence against a scheme of diverting public health funds, involving influential politicians and powerful businessmen. We need to find copies of these documents or the entire case could fall apart, the inspector explained. And we also need to ensure your family's safety, Dr. Stone. Those involved are dangerous and will not hesitate to try to intimidate you. I have some digital copies on secure drives, Julian replied, but the originals with signatures and stamps were in the briefcase. While the adults talked in the library, Matthew slipped out into the garden. He sat on the swing hanging from a large oak tree and watched the blue pendant against the light. He thought of Bea. Where would she be right now? Would she be hungry? Cold? Why was a child with so much knowledge and courage living on the streets? Determined, Matthew stealthily entered the house and went to his father's study. He turned on the computer and began searching for street children in London, for NHS paramedics who might have a daughter named Bea, for any clue that could lead him to his saviour. Not far from there, on the outskirts of London, Bea, or Beatrice Carter, her full name, watched St. Thomas's Hospital from a distance. She had read in abandoned newspapers that Judge Stone had been discharged. She felt relieved that he had recovered, but also apprehensive. Bea was not an ordinary street child. Until 6 months ago, she had a normal life, with loving parents and a simple but comfortable home. Her father, Robert Carter, was indeed an NHS paramedic, and her mother, Helen, a nurse at Guy's Hospital. Both were dedicated professionals who had witnessed serious irregularities in the health system: diversion of medicines, poor quality equipment, negligence resulting in patients who never woke up again. When they decided to report the scheme, the threats began. Robert was suspended from work under false accusations. Helen was transferred to an isolated department of the hospital. The situation became untenable when strange men began to lurk around their house. One fateful night, Robert and Helen hastily packed their bags, gathered important documents, and fled with Beatrice. The plan was to go to the countryside where Robert's brother would shelter them until they could leave the country. But they were intercepted on the way. The car was forced off the road. Robert managed to hide Beatrice in a ditch before the men reached them. The last thing she heard was her mother's screams telling her to run and never look back. Since then, Beatrice had lived like a ghost, sleeping in abandoned shelters, begging for food at bakeries, fleeing social workers who tried to take her to institutions. She was afraid of being found by the same men who separated her family. She didn't know if her parents were alive or... No, she couldn't think of that possibility. She preferred to believe they were hiding, or perhaps abroad, and one day they would come for her. When she saw Matthew desperate that rainy night, something compelled her to help, and when she discovered that the injured man was Judge Julian Stone, the same name her father mentioned as the only judge we can trust, she felt that maybe, just maybe, fate was offering her a chance. Now hidden among bushes near the hospital, Bea watched the activity. She had learned to become invisible on the streets, to overhear conversations without being noticed, to gather information. And what she had discovered scared her. The man who led the corruption scheme her parents had reported was the same one who now wanted to silence Judge Stone, Senator Paul Monroe, about to become governor in the next elections. Even more alarming, among the security guards hired to protect the judge at the hospital, Bea recognized one of the men who had been present on the night her parents disappeared. The girl bit her lip, indecisive. Part of her wanted to flee far away, remain invisible, surviving day by day until her parents found her. But another part, the part that inherited Robert's courage and Helen's determination, knew she needed to warn the judge. Not just for him, or for the kind-eyed boy she met in the rain, but because perhaps this was the only chance to find out what had happened to her family. With a pounding heart, Bea adjusted the backpack on her thin shoulders and made a decision. She would find a way to enter the judge's house and reveal what she knew. It was risky, but as her father always said, Carters don't run from danger when lives are at stake. And now, many lives were at stake, including her own. The Stone Mansion in Kensington was impressive, with its well-tended gardens and advanced security system. To Bea, who observed the property hidden behind a tree on the street, it seemed like an impenetrable fortress. 3 days had passed since she decided to look for the judge, and during that time she had carefully studied the house's routine, the times the electronic gate opened, the security guard's shifts, the camera's blind spots. "How am I going to get in there?" she murmured to herself, adjusting the worn backpack on her shoulders. Her stomach rumbled with hunger. She hadn't eaten anything but a piece of bread since the previous morning. Just then, a blue sports car approached the gate. Bea recognized the woman at the wheel as Claire Stone, the judge's wife, whom she had seen in newspaper photos. In the passenger seat was Matthew, looking distractedly out the window. Bea's heart quickened at the sight of the boy. The car stopped in front of the gate, waiting for it to open. That's when Matthew and Bea's eyes met. The boy's eyes widened, unable to believe what he saw. The next instant, he was opening the car door, ignoring his mother's protests. "Bea, it's really you," he shouted, running towards the girl. Startled by the sudden attention, Bea considered fleeing, but something kept her paralyzed. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps hunger, or perhaps just the genuinely happy expression on Matthew's face. "What are you doing here?" Matthew asked, finally reaching her. I needed to talk to your dad," Bea replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Matthew, who is this girl?" Claire Stone had gotten out of the car and was approaching with a worried expression. "Mum, it's her. It's Bea, the girl who saved Dad," Matthew exclaimed, excited. Claire stopped, looking intently at the small figure in front of her. A thin little girl in worn clothes several sizes too big for her, disheveled curly hair and eyes. Huge ancient eyes in such a young face, eyes that had seen things no child should see. "Beatrice!" Claire knelt down to be at the girl's height. "We've been looking for you. My goodness, you're so thin. Come, you need to eat something." Before Bea could protest, Claire gently led her into the car. Matthew jumped into the back seat beside the girl, holding her hand as if he feared she might disappear again. "Do you still have my pendant?" Bea asked timidly. Matthew smiled, pulling the cord he wore under his t-shirt. "Never take it off, it brings good luck, remember." The mansion gate opened automatically. and the car entered the property. Bea looked at everything with admiration and a hint of apprehension. She had never been in such a luxurious place. The well-kept gardens, the fountain in the center of the circular driveway, the imposing three-story house. It seemed like another world. "My husband will be very happy to meet you," Claire commented, parking the car. "He wanted so much to thank you personally for what you did." Inside the mansion, Bea was taken to the spacious kitchen, where the housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor, a kind, middle-aged woman, prepared a substantial snack. The girl ate voraciously but always alert, her eyes constantly moving, assessing doors and windows, habits acquired on the streets. Julian Stone appeared in the kitchen, leaning on a cane. He was still pale and had a discreet bandage on his temple, but his eyes lit up when he saw the girl. "So you're my hero," he said, sitting opposite Bea. "Matthew hasn't stopped talking about you. The doctors said that if it weren't for your first aid, I might not be here today." Bea blushed slightly, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I just did what? My dad taught me." "And where is your dad now?" Claire asked, sitting beside her husband. The girl lowered her eyes, nervously playing with the napkin. "I don't know. He and my mum, they had to flee. Bad people were after them." Claire and Julian exchanged worried glances. Matthew, who had remained quiet, observing the scene, approached and sat beside Bea. "Why were these people after your parents?" the judge asked, in a gentle voice. Bea hesitated. She had kept her secret for so long, learned not to trust adults, but something in the judge's eyes, perhaps the same, integrity her father admired, made her decide. "My dad is Robert Carter, an NHS paramedic. My mum is Helen Carter, a nurse at Guy's Hospital," she began, her voice trembling. "They saw wrong things at the hospital. Medicines disappearing, equipment not working properly, people who went to sleep and never woke up again after simple surgeries." Julian leaned forward, suddenly more interested. "They reported these irregularities." Bea nodded. "To you?" "My dad said you were the only judge we could trust. He sent documents, recordings. After that, the threats started. My dad was fired with lies. My mum was transferred to an isolated place in the hospital." Julian's face grew even paler. "Robert and Helen Carter," he murmured, the memory finally connecting. "The case of the health system diversions. They were my main witnesses." "One night, they said we needed to flee," Bea continued, tears now flowing freely. "We were going to the countryside, to my uncle's house, but on the way, our car was attacked. Dad hid me in a ditch before the men arrived. Mum screamed for me to run and never look back." Claire covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. Matthew instinctively hugged Bea, feeling her tremble. "After that I was alone," the girl concluded. "I couldn't go to shelters because there were people looking for me, so I learned to manage on the streets." "How long ago did this happen?" Claire asked, her voice choked. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Bea replied with precision. Julian got up, walking around the kitchen despite the pain. "That's why I couldn't contact them anymore. I thought they had given up on the case, that they had been bought off or intimidated. I never imagined—" He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. "Judge, there's one more thing," Bea said, gathering courage. "One of the men who attacked you in the alley, he was there the night my parents disappeared?" The silence that followed was heavy, interrupted only by the ticking of the wall clock. "How do you know that?" Julian asked finally. "I saw the photos in the newspapers of the men who attacked you, and I recognized one of them." "Beatrice, this is very serious. Are you absolutely sure?" The girl nodded firmly. "I am. I would never forget that face." Julian exchanged a significant look with Claire. "And there's one more thing you need to know," she continued, sitting back down. "One of the security guards hired to protect me at the hospital. I saw him watching your room. He's the same man who was there when my parents were taken." The judge jumped up, ignoring the pain. "I'm calling Inspector Owens right now." "No," Bea exclaimed, startling everyone. "We can't trust the police. They might be involved too. That's what my dad always said." "Inspector Owens is trustworthy," Julian assured her. "How are you sure? How do you know she doesn't work for them?" The girl's question hung in the air, unsettling. "For whom, Beatrice? Who are they?" Claire asked. Senator Paul Monroe, Bee replied, her voice filled with hatred, a disturbing emotion coming from such a small child. My dad said he was in charge of everything, and now he's going to be governor. Julian sat down again, visibly shaken. Senator Monroe is exactly who I'm investigating. The documents that were stolen contained evidence against him and others involved in the health diversion scheme. A noise at the kitchen entrance made everyone turn. It was Anthony, the head of security for the mansion. Dr. Stone, there are 2 men from the Federal Police at the gate. They say they need to speak with you urgently about the case. Bee paled, instinctively clutching Matthew's hand. They're not real police, she whispered. It's them. Julian hesitated only a second before making a decision. Anthony, don't let them in. Tell them I'm resting and can't receive anyone now, and reinforce security immediately. As soon as the security guard left, Julian turned to Claire. Take the children to the safe room. I'll try to contact Justice Thomas. He'll know what to do. Claire wasted no time. She led Bee and Matthew down a corridor to Julian's study. There she activated a hidden mechanism in a bookshelf, revealing a secret door that led to a small armored room equipped with security monitors, a phone, a computer, water, and non-perishable food. Stay here and don't make any noise, Claire instructed. I'll be back soon. When the door closed, Matthew looked at Bee, who was trembling slightly. Don't be afraid, he said, holding the girl's hand. My dad will fix everything. I'm not afraid, Bee replied, though her voice betrayed the opposite. I'm just tired of running. Matthew squeezed her hand tighter. You're not alone anymore, Bee. Now, we're a team. The girl looked at him, a hesitant smile appearing on her lips. For the first time in 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Bee felt something she had forgotten. Hope. Outside the safe room, Julian frantically typed on his phone, sending encrypted messages to trusted contacts. Bee's revelation had connected the last dots. The attack he suffered was not a common robbery, but an attempt to silence him, just as they had tried to silence Robert and Helen Carter. The judge looked at the photo on his desk, him, Claire, and Matthew smiling during a beach vacation. Now there was one more life to protect, and perhaps, just perhaps through Beatrice, he could finally bring justice not only for his own family, but also for the Carters. Willow Creek Farm, located in the countryside near Windsor, seemed straight out of a postcard. Green fields stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted only by a small lake of crystal-clear waters and a colonial-style main house, with its white walls and blue windows. It had been the Stone family's refuge for 3 generations, a place where Julian had spent his childhood summers, and where he now brought his family and Beatrice, seeking safety away from the capital. It's so big, Bee exclaimed, looking out the car window in wonder as they drove up the dirt road leading to the house. Her eyes scanned the fields, the grazing animals, the fruit trees, a world completely different from the grey streets of London. Wait until you see the orchard, Matthew commented, excited to show his favourite place to his new friend. There are apples, pears, cherries, and best of all, a stream where we can swim. Claire smiled at her son's excitement. In the 2 weeks since Bee's arrival at the Kensington mansion, Matthew had transformed. The shy and reserved boy now radiated energy and purpose, determined to make Bee smile, to show her that the world could still be good. Julian, driving in silence, observed the scene in the rearview mirror. The decision to bring everyone to the farm had not been easy. It meant temporarily stepping away from the case, trusting allies to continue the investigation in London. But after the attempted invasion of the mansion by fake federal police, there was no alternative. Detective Inspector Rachel Owens, after careful vetting by Julian, proved trustworthy. It was she who organized the family's discreet departure from the capital, with different cars and alternative routes to throw off potential pursuers. "We're here," Julian announced, parking in front of the main house. They were greeted by Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Edith, the caretakers who had looked after the farm for decades. Both had been informed of the family's arrival, but not the real reasons behind the sudden visit. "Dr. Stone, what a joy to have you here," exclaimed Mrs. Edith, a robust woman with grey hair and a welcoming smile. "And who is this young lady?" she asked, noticing Bea, who was partially hiding behind Claire. "This is Beatrice," Claire introduced. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Another child to brighten this house. Come, girl, I'll show you your room. I made a corn cake you'll love," the woman said, extending her hand to Bea. The girl hesitated, looking at Claire as if asking for permission. Receiving an affirmative nod, she shyly followed the caretaker, with Matthew close behind. As soon as the children left, Julian turned to Mr. Arthur. "I need you to reinforce security, Arthur. I've hired 2 more trustworthy men, who should arrive tomorrow. No one enters the farm without my express authorization, understood?" The caretaker nodded, serious. "Leave it to me, Doctor. Is there a problem I should know about? It's better you don't know the details for your own safety. Just trust me." Inside the house, Bea looked in wonder at the room assigned to her, spacious, with a canopy bed, floral curtains, and a view of the orchard. It was larger than the apartment where she had lived with her parents. "Do you like it?" Matthew asked, standing in the doorway. "It's perfect," she replied, still taking it all in. "But it's not fair for me to have such a beautiful room. I'm not family." Matthew frowned, entering the room. "Of course it's fair. You saved my dad. Besides," he hesitated, blushing slightly, "you're my friend now, the best friend I've ever had." Bea smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face and made her seem, finally, like a 7-year-old child. "I've never had a friend like you either." That night, during dinner at the large wooden table in the dining room, Bea ate with appetite for the first time in months. Mrs. Edith's homemade food, rice, beans, free-range chicken, garden salad, was a feast compared to the scraps she found on the streets, or the simple meals her mother prepared with limited resources. "Eat more, girl, you're too thin," Mrs. Edith insisted, serving another generous portion. After dinner, Julian retired to the study to make calls. Claire took the children to the veranda, where they sat in rocking chairs, watching the starry sky, a spectacle impossible to see in polluted London. "I've never seen so many stars," Bea commented, amazed. "That one there is the Orion constellation," Matthew pointed, showing his astronomy knowledge. "And that's the Big Dipper." "Your son is very smart, Mrs. Stone," Bea said admiringly. Claire smiled, stroking the girl's hair, who, after a good bath and new clothes, looked like a different person. "You're also very smart, Beatrice. The way you survived alone all these months, how you helped Julian, that shows incredible strength." Bea lowered her eyes, suddenly serious. "I just wanted to find my parents." A heavy silence settled. Claire exchanged a meaningful look with Matthew, who understood the message and discreetly entered the house, leaving the two alone. "Beatrice," Claire began, choosing her words carefully, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're not alone anymore. We'll help you find your parents, and in the meantime you have a home with us." The girl nodded, her eyes welling up. "Thank you, Mrs. Stone, but what if my parents can't be found? What if they—" She couldn't complete the sentence. Claire approached, hugging her. "Don't think about that now. We have to have hope. And even in the worst-case scenario, I want you to know that Julian, Matthew, and I will always be here for you." At that moment, Julian appeared on the veranda, his face tense after the calls. Seeing the scene, his expression softened. "Are you two all right?" he asked, sitting beside them. Claire nodded, still hugging Bea. "We were just talking." Julian watched the girl for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Beatrice, there's something I need to tell you. Something about myself that few people know." The girl looked at him, curious. "When I was about your age, I also lost my parents," the judge revealed. "A car accident. I had no other close relatives, so I was sent to an orphanage." "I'm sorry," Bea murmured, surprised by the revelation. "It was difficult," Julian continued. "I was a rebellious, sad boy, until one day a man appeared at the orphanage. Justice Thomas, the same one who is helping us now. He couldn't have children and decided to adopt me." Claire watched her husband with tenderness. Julian rarely spoke about his past, even to her. Justice Thomas was a strict, demanding man, but he gave me education, opportunities, a future. I became a judge to follow in his footsteps. What he couldn't teach me, however, was how to express affection. I only learned that much later when I met Claire and when Matthew was born. B listened attentively, not fully understanding where the judge was going with this. What I mean, Beatrice, is that I understand your pain. I understand what it's like to feel lost without family. And I want you to know that while we search for your parents, you have a place with us, not as a temporary guest, but as part of the family. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Judge. Now, Julian also has news about the case, Claire intervened, realizing the conversation was becoming too emotionally intense. The judge nodded, resuming his serious posture. I spoke with Inspector Owens. She managed to identify the man Beatrice recognized as one of the attackers. He is Mark Vickers, a former police officer expelled from the force for corruption. He works as a private security guard for businessmen linked to Senator Monroe. And my parents, Bea asked anxiously, did you find any information about them? Julian hesitated, choosing his words. We don't have confirmation yet, Beatrice, but they found the car your parents were using on the night they disappeared. It was abandoned on a secondary road near Reading. There were signs of a struggle, but no... He stopped, unable to say the word. No bodies, Bea completed with startling maturity. Which means they might be alive, right? Yes, it's possible, Julian agreed, though his tone wasn't very convincing. The important thing now is to gather all the evidence against Senator Monroe and his accomplices. Only then can we discover the whole truth. At that moment, Matthew returned to the veranda, carrying a chessboard. I thought we could play a bit before bed, he suggested, trying to lighten the heavy mood. Bea smiled, grateful for the distraction. You'll have to teach me. I've never played chess. It's easy, Matthew assured her, setting up the pieces on the table. The most important thing is to think several steps ahead. While the children concentrated on the game, Claire pulled Julian to a more secluded corner of the veranda. And what else did the inspector find out? What didn't you want to say in front of her? She whispered. Julian sighed, running a hand through his grey hair. They found blood in the Carter's car. They're doing DNA tests to confirm if it's theirs. And there are reports of a couple similar to Robert and Helen boarding a flight abroad the day after the disappearance, but using false documents. They might have managed to escape, or they might have been forced, Claire completed, understanding the gravity of the situation. What will we do if they're no longer, you know? We won't think about that now, Julian interrupted, looking at Bea, who was laughing at something Matthew had said. The important thing is to keep Beatrice safe and continue the investigation. The rest, time will tell. The couple watched the children in silence, both thinking about the strange path that had led them there. In just 2 weeks, Beatrice's presence had transformed the family dynamic. Matthew, always so solitary, now overflowed with joy. Claire, who had always wanted more children but couldn't have due to complications during Matthew's birth, felt inexplicably connected to the girl. And Julian, normally reserved and pragmatic, saw in Bea a chance for redemption, to do for her what Justice Thomas had done for him years ago. The night passed peacefully at Willow Creek Farm. Under the blanket of stars, 2 children played chess, momentarily oblivious to the dangers and uncertainties. But the peace was only apparent. In London, powerful forces were moving, determined to silence any threat to the corruption scheme that had ruined so many lives, including that of a small family who only wanted to do what was right. 3 weeks had passed since their arrival at Willow Creek Farm. Life on the property had acquired a peaceful routine that did everyone good, especially Bea. The girl had gained weight, color in her cheeks, and a vivacity that had previously been dormant under layers of fear and survival. Every morning she and Matthew helped Mrs. Edith feed the chickens and collect fresh eggs. Afterwards, they had impromptu lessons with Claire, who had created a small homeschooling system so the children wouldn't fall behind in their studies. Afternoons were dedicated to exploring the farm, always closely accompanied by one of the security guards hired by Julian. That particular afternoon, the children were playing near the stream under the supervision of Sebastian, one of the most experienced security guards. Bea was barefoot, feeling the cool water on her feet, while Matthew tried to catch small fish with an improvised net. "Did you know my parents brought me here when I was a baby?" Matthew commented, focused on his task. "There's a photo of me crawling in this very stream." B smiled, imagining a baby Matthew. "That must have been cute." "Very cute," said a voice behind them. It was Claire, approaching with a tray of juices and biscuits. He had such chubby cheeks everyone wanted to pinch them. "Mum," Matthew protested, blushing with embarrassment. Claire laughed, placing the tray on a flat stone. She sat beside the children, watching the clear stream. "Are you having fun?" "It's the best place in the world," Bea declared, with the sincerity characteristic of childhood. "I wish we could stay here, forever." A momentary silence followed these words. Claire exchanged a significant look with Sebastian, who remained at a respectful distance. "Children, we need to go back to the house," Claire said finally. "Matthew's father wants to talk to all of us." "Has something happened?" Matthew asked, immediately alert. "Yes, but nothing bad," Claire reassured him. "Just important news." The walk back to the main house was made in expectant silence. Upon arriving, they found Julian in the study, accompanied by Detective Inspector Rachel Owens, who had arrived from London that morning. "Good afternoon, children," the inspector greeted with a warm smile. "Especially you, Beatrice. I've heard a lot about your courage." Bea blushed slightly, still uncomfortable with compliments. "Please sit down," Julian requested, indicating the chairs. "We have important news." Everyone settled down, anxious. Julian exchanged a look with the inspector before beginning. "First, I want you to know that we have gathered enough evidence against Senator Monroe and his associates. Documents, testimonies, suspicious bank transfers. Everything points to his involvement in the health fund diversion scheme." "What about the men who attacked us?" Matthew asked. "We've identified them all," Inspector Owens replied. "Mark Vickers, whom Beatrice recognized, is already in custody. He has begun to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." Bea, who had been quiet until then, finally asked the question burning in her chest. "And my parents, did you find anything about them?" A tense silence filled the room. Julian approached the girl, kneeling to be at her eye level. "Beatrice, we found clues about your parents," he began cautiously. "We confirmed that they managed to escape on the night of the attack. They used false documents to leave the country." The girl's eyes lit up with hope. "So they're alive? Where are they?" Julian hesitated. "We believe so. There are records of a couple with their characteristics entering Canada and then moving on to Europe. We are working with Interpol to locate them." "Did they abandon me?" Bea asked, her voice trembling. "Did they flee without me?" "No, darling," Claire intervened, hugging her. "I'm sure they believed you would be with them. They probably thought you had managed to escape with your father, and by the time they realized you hadn't, it was too late to go back. Or perhaps they were forced out of the country," the inspector suggested. "We are investigating all possibilities. The important thing is that there's a good chance your parents are alive and safe." Bea absorbed the information in silence, conflicting emotions etched on her young face. Joy at the possibility of her parents being alive, hurt at them having left without her, fear of never seeing them again. "There's one more thing," Julian continued, after giving Bea time to process the news. "Something that only Beatrice can help us with." Everyone looked at him, curious. Mark Vickers mentioned that Robert Carter had concrete evidence against Senator Monroe, original documents that would definitively compromise the senator and his allies. He said Robert always carried these proofs with him, but they were never found after the attack. Bea frowned, thoughtful. "Dad had a brown briefcase he took everywhere. On the day we fled, he put it in his backpack." "And do you know what happened to that backpack?" the inspector asked, leaning forward. The girl closed her eyes, trying to remember that confusing and frightening night. "When the car went off the road, Dad grabbed the backpack and hid me in the ditch. He put the backpack with me." "And where is that backpack now?" Julian questioned, trying not to show his excitement. "I took it with me when I fled," Bea replied, "but it was too heavy and drawing attention, so I took out what I needed, the first aid kit, some clothes, a photo of my parents, and hid the rest." "Where, Beatrice?" the inspector insisted. "Where did you hide the backpack?" Bea hesitated, looking at everyone in the room. Despite the trust she had developed for the Stone family, years of cautious teachings from her parents still echoed in her mind. "It's okay," Claire assured her, squeezing her hand. "You can trust Inspector. Oh, she's helping us." The girl took a deep breath. "In the London Public Library, in the children's section, there's a shelf with big fairy tale books. I put the briefcase behind the hardcover books on the top shelf, the one too high for other children to reach." Julian and the inspector exchanged enthusiastic glances. "That's a brilliant hiding place," the inspector praised. "No one would think to look for important documents in the children's section of a library." "Dad always said the best hiding places are where no one thinks to look," Bea commented with a small smile. "I need to retrieve that briefcase immediately," Julian declared, standing up. "If it contains what I believe, it could be the final piece we need to bring everyone to justice." "You can't go to London," Claire reminded him, worried. "It's too dangerous." "I'll go," the inspector decided, "with a small, discreet team. No one will suspect a routine visit to the library." "I need to go too," Bea suddenly asserted. "I know exactly where it is, and the briefcase has a coded lock. Only I know the combination." "No way," Claire protested. "It's too risky." "But Mum," Matthew intervened, "what if Bea can't explain properly where it is? What if the inspector can't find it?" "It's no use arguing, Claire," Julian said after a moment's thought. "Beatrice is right. She needs to go. But," he turned to the inspector, "do you guarantee her absolute safety?" "With my life," Rachel Owens promised. Preparations for the trip to London were made with extreme care. The inspector organized a small, trusted team. It was decided that only she, a plainclothes officer, Bea, and, at the girl's insistence, Matthew would go to the library. Claire vehemently protested against her son going, but eventually relented when she realized Matthew's presence calmed Bea. The next morning, they departed in an unmarked car without police identification. The journey from Windsor to London took just over an hour. Bea, who was tense at first, gradually calmed down with Matthew's jokes and conversations. "When all this is over," the boy said, "we'll convince our parents to take us to Disney World. Have you ever imagined riding the Space Mountain roller coaster?" Bea smiled, letting herself be carried away by her friend's enthusiasm. In moments like that, she could briefly forget the weight she carried and simply be a 7-year-old child. Upon arriving in London, the inspector parked the car a few blocks from the London Public Library. "Remember the plan," she instructed. "We go in normally, like an aunt taking her nephews to research a school project. No nervous glances or suspicious behavior." The children nodded, serious. The plainclothes officer, who had introduced himself only as Ryan, would follow separately, pretending to be a university student, to provide additional cover. The library was relatively empty that Wednesday morning. They walked quietly to the children's section, a colorful and welcoming space on the second floor. Bea guided them safely to the indicated shelf, a tall wooden structure filled with illustrated fairy tale books. "It's there," she whispered, pointing to the highest shelf, "behind the big hardcover books." The inspector, being the tallest, reached the shelf and carefully moved the books. Her fingers touched something, a brown leather briefcase exactly as Bea had described. "Found it," she murmured, gently pulling it out. At that moment, the inspector's phone vibrated. It was a message from Ryan. "Two suspicious men have entered. They seem to be looking for someone." The inspector's heart pounded. How had they been discovered? Had they been followed from the farm? Or was there an informant among them? "We need to get out of here now," she whispered to the children, putting the briefcase in her large bag. "Stay close to me." They began to move towards a secondary exit when they saw 2 men entering the children's section. Bea immediately recognized one of them. It was one of the security guards who had been at the hospital, watching Judge Stone's room. "It's him," the girl whispered, terrified, clutching Matthew's hand. "Calm down," the inspector reassured her, though her own pulse was racing. "We'll go out through that back door." They began to move discreetly, but the movement caught the men's attention. One of them pointed in their direction, and both began to approach rapidly. "Run!" the inspector ordered, pushing the children ahead. Bea and Matthew ran as never before, through narrow corridors between shelves down a service staircase. The inspector was right behind them, exchanging frantic messages with Ryan, who had positioned himself strategically to intercept the pursuers. They managed to reach the ground floor and were about to reach the main door when a third man appeared, blocking their exit. The inspector pushed the children behind her, ready for confrontation. "Inspector Owens, what a surprise to find you here," the man said with a false smile. "Lieutenant Bryan," the inspector recognized, tense. "What are you doing here? As far as I know, you're suspended from duty." "Just helping some friends," he replied, his eyes fixing on the children behind her. "I see you found little Beatrice Carter. Important people are looking for her." "She's under my protection," the inspector declared, "and you are obstructing a federal investigation." The lieutenant laughed disdainfully. "Not for long. Soon Senator Monroe will be governor, and people like you and Judge Stone will just be footnotes." At that moment, Ryan appeared, accompanied by 2 library guards and a uniformed police officer who was on duty in the block. Lieutenant Bryan realized he was at a disadvantage and retreated. "This isn't over," he threatened, before quickly moving away. "We need to get out of here," Ryan urged. "They probably have more men outside." Using a back exit and an alternative route, they managed to reach the car without further incident. Throughout the journey back to the farm, they remained vigilant, changing routes several times to ensure they were not being followed. When they finally arrived at Willow Creek Farm, it was already night. Claire ran to hug her son and Bee, tears of relief streaming down her face. Julian awaited anxiously in the study, and his expression brightened when the inspector handed him the briefcase. "Beatrice, we need the combination," he asked gently. The girl approached the briefcase, her small fingers turning the numbers on the lock with precision. "It's my mum's birthday," she explained. 240781. The lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside the briefcase, they found exactly what they expected: original documents detailing the health fund diversion scheme, with signatures, official stamps, fraudulent contracts, and, most impressively, a USB drive containing recordings of meetings where Senator Monroe himself openly discussed the details of the operation. "This is more than enough," the inspector declared after examining the contents. "With this evidence, we can request the preventive arrest of the senator and everyone involved." Julian nodded, satisfied, but his gaze soon turned to Bee, who watched everything with tired but attentive eyes. "You were very brave today, Beatrice. Your parents would be proud." The girl smiled sadly. "Do you think I'll ever find them?" "I'm sure you will," Julian replied, though in his heart he couldn't make such a promise. "And in the meantime, you have us." That night, after the day's emotions, Bee couldn't sleep. She sat on the veranda watching the stars when Matthew joined her, bringing 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Mrs. Edith said it helps you sleep," he explained, handing one of the cups to his friend. They drank in comfortable silence for a few minutes until Bee finally spoke. "Thank you for being with me today. I couldn't have done it without you." Matthew smiled, blushing slightly. "We're a team, remember?" The girl nodded, looking back at the stars. "You know, Matthew, I think even if I find my parents one day, I'll never forget you. Your family, your mum, your dad, you saved me in so many ways." "Maybe you don't have to choose," Matthew suggested. "Maybe we can be 2 families who love each other very much." Bee smiled at the simplicity and wisdom of the suggestion. In a child's mind, solutions always seemed so obvious. Inside the house, Claire watched the children through the window, her heart aching. Beside her, Julian reviewed the documents found in the briefcase. "What will we do now?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the 2 small figures on the veranda. "Tomorrow morning, Inspector Owens will take all the evidence to London. With luck, by the end of the week, we'll have arrest warrants for everyone involved," Julian replied. "That's not what I'm talking about," Claire said softly. "I'm talking about Beatrice. What will happen to her when all this is over?" Julian stopped what he was doing, looking at his wife intently. "What do you suggest?" "You know what I'm thinking, Julian. You see her with Matthew. They've connected in a way I've never seen before. And well, you know I always wanted more children." The judge remained silent for a moment, considering the implications. "What if we find her parents?" "Then she'll have her family back, and that will be wonderful," Claire replied. "But if we don't find them, if they really are out of the country and unable to return, or if the worst has happened—" "Are you suggesting we adopt her?" Julian asked, direct as always. Claire nodded, her eyes meeting her husband's. "I think in a way she's already adopted us too, and I can't imagine this house without her now." Julian looked again at the children on the veranda. Beatrice, who had appeared in their lives so unexpectedly, who had saved his life, who had shown extraordinary courage and intelligence, and Matthew, his quiet and introverted son, now so lively and protective alongside his new friend. "Let's solve this case first," he decided. "Ensure everyone is safe. Then, we'll talk to Beatrice. The final decision must be hers." Claire smiled, knowing that this answer, coming from her pragmatic husband, was practically a yes. She returned to watching the children, who were now pointing at a shooting star crossing the night sky. A silent wish formed in her heart, that whatever fate held for all of them, Beatrice could finally find peace and a place to call home. The Royal Courts of Justice in London was packed that spring morning. Journalists crowded the corridors, cameras pointed at the doors of the courtroom where the most anticipated hearing of the year would take place. The case that had shaken the foundations of the county's political and business power finally reached its crucial moment. Beatrice waited in a private room, wearing a navy blue dress that Claire had chosen specially for the occasion. Her curly hair, now well-groomed and shiny, was tied in a simple ponytail. Her small hands continuously twisted a handkerchief, betraying her nervousness. "It's going to be okay," Matthew assured her, sitting beside her, holding her free hand. In the 4 months since they met, the two had developed a bond that went beyond friendship. It was almost a sibling connection. Claire affectionately tidied a loose strand of Bee's hair with maternal care. "Remember, you just need to tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." "What if they don't believe me?" Bee asked, the insecurity evident in her voice. "I'm just a child." "They will believe you," Julian affirmed, standing by the window. "The documents we found corroborate your every word, and Inspector Owens has gathered even more evidence since then." The door opened, and the inspector herself entered, accompanied by a social worker assigned by the court to accompany Beatrice during her testimony. "It's time," Rachel Owens announced. Bee took a deep breath, standing up. Claire hugged her tightly, and Matthew gave her an encouraging smile. "We'll be right there in the first row," Claire reminded her. "Look at us if you get nervous." The walk to the courtroom seemed endless. Upon entering, Bee felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. In the center, a table where the judge, prosecutors, and court officers sat. To the left, the defendants, businessmen, public officials, and most notably among them, Senator Paul Monroe, who stared at her with calculated coldness. Beatrice was led to a chair specially prepared for her, adjusted to her height. She took the oath, her small voice echoing into the microphone. "Beatrice Carter," the prosecutor began, a middle-aged man with a gentle voice. "Can you tell us what happened on the night your parents disappeared?" The girl looked briefly at the Stone family before beginning her account. With surprising clarity for someone so young, she narrated the events of that fateful night, the interrupted escape, the car attack, how her parents hid her, the screams, the fear. "And what did you do afterwards?" the prosecutor asked. "I stayed hidden until I heard no more noise. Then I took the backpack my dad left with me and ran." "I ran a lot," Bee replied, her voice trembling with the memory. "Why didn't you seek help, the police, social services?" "My dad always said not to. Trust the police if something happened. He said there were powerful people involved who could hurt me too." The testimony continued, detailing how Beatrice survived on the streets for 6 months, how she learned to hide, to get food, to avoid dangers. The court listened in respectful silence, many visibly moved by the narrative of the little survivor. When it came to the part about meeting Matthew and helping Julian, Bee's voice gained strength. She described with surprising technical precision the first aid procedures she had performed, knowledge acquired from her paramedic father. "And why did you decide to help? Judge Stone, even knowing it could be dangerous for you?" the prosecutor questioned. Bee thought for a moment. "Because it was the right thing to do. My parents always taught me to help those in need. And also, the boy seemed so scared. He reminded me of myself." The senator's defense lawyer, a man in an impeccable suit and a stern expression, rose for cross-examination. His objective was clear: to discredit the testimony of a 7-year-old child. Miss Carter, how can we trust the memory of someone so young about traumatic events that occurred almost a year ago? He asked, condescendingly. B looked at him directly, unafraid. Some things are impossible to forget, sir. And these proofs that your father supposedly left, couldn't they have been planted or fabricated later? No, sir, B replied firmly. The briefcase had a lock with my mum's birthday date. Only we knew that combination. A 7-year-old child living on the streets for 6 months. It seems unlikely she managed to survive alone, don't you think? B took a deep breath before responding. I didn't choose to grow up so fast, sir. The world forced me to. But I chose not to be silent, even. When scared, a murmur ran through the room. Even the defense lawyer seemed momentarily speechless. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman, discreetly wiped tears from her eyes. When the defense lawyer finally concluded his questioning, she asked permission to ask a question, an unusual procedure but which the judge allowed. Beatrice, the woman said, her voice choked, what do you hope will happen when all this is over? The girl looked at the Stone family, sitting in the first row. Matthew waved encouragingly, Claire smiled through tears, and Julian watched her with almost paternal pride. I hope my parents are well wherever they are, she replied honestly. I hope no one else goes through what I went through. And I hope, she hesitated, I hope I have finally found a place to call home. After Beatrice's testimony, days of presenting technical evidence, expert testimonies, and additional witnesses followed. The recordings found on Robert Carter's USB drive were particularly devastating. Senator Monroe, in his own words, openly discussing the diversion of funds intended for public hospitals. 2 weeks later, the verdict was announced: guilty. The senator, his accomplices in the ministries, and the businessmen involved were sentenced to long prison terms. The sentence was met with applause in the courtroom and celebrations in the streets. For the Stone family and Beatrice, however, the end of the trial represented the beginning of a new phase, perhaps the most challenging of all. The international search for Beatrice's parents continued. Interpol had found traces of the Carter couple in Spain, then in Portugal, but the trail went cold from there. There were rumors that they had gone to some South American country, possibly under new identities. Meanwhile, Beatrice remained under the Stones' temporary guardianship. What began as an emergency protection measure had evolved into an arrangement that, although provisional on paper, felt increasingly permanent in their hearts. One sunny Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the verdict, the family was having a barbecue in the garden of the Kensington mansion, where they had returned after the danger had passed. Matthew and Bea were playing in the pool, while Claire set the table and Julian tended the grill. "Dad, look what Bea can do," Matthew shouted as the girl executed a perfect dive into the pool. "Impressive," Julian praised, smiling. It was rare to see him so relaxed and happy. The house. Intercom rang. Mrs. Eleanor, who had accompanied them from the farm back to the mansion, answered, her face visibly paled. "Dr. Stone," she called, There are 2 people at the gate. They say they are Robert and Helen Carter." Time seemed to freeze. Claire dropped a plate which shattered on the veranda floor. Julian stood paralyzed, the barbecue tongs suspended in the air. The children, oblivious to what was happening, continued playing in the water. "Open the gate," Julian finally ordered, his voice hoarse, "and call Beatrice." Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, a tall man with a grey beard and a thin woman with curly hair, the same curls as Beatrice, entered the garden. They were older than in the photos, thinner, with eyes that carried the weight of a long journey, but they were unmistakably Bea's parents. "Dad? Mum?" Beatrice's voice was almost inaudible as she emerged from the pool, wrapped in a towel. She stood still, as if she couldn't believe what she saw. "My daughter," Helen Carter sobbed, opening her arms. "My little one." Bea ran, throwing herself into her parents' arms. The 3 fell to their knees on the lawn, embracing, crying, laughing, a reunion many believed impossible. Claire held Matthew's hand, who watched the scene with a mixture of joy for his friend and an unmistakable fear of losing her. Julian remained distant, respecting the moment of the reunited family. After the initial emotions, everyone sat on the veranda. Robert and Helen told their story, how they had been forced to leave the country after the attack, believing Beatrice had been captured. They spent months desperately searching for her through clandestine contacts, fearing to reveal their identities. When we heard about the trial, that Beatrice was alive and had helped bring down Monroe, we couldn't believe it, Robert explained. We tried to come back immediately, but there were legal complications, false documents, borders to cross. It took longer than we would have liked. The important thing is that you're here now, Julian said diplomatically, though his heart was heavy. In 6 months, Beatrice had become an indispensable part of the family. The idea of seeing her leave was too painful to contemplate. The children had retired to Matthew's room, where they talked in low tones. Bea was ecstatic to be reunited with her parents, but also confused and divided. "They want me to go back home with them," she explained to Matthew. "They bought a house in the countryside where we can be safe." "And do you want to go?" Matthew asked, trying to hide the sadness in his voice. Bea hesitated. "They're my parents, Matthew. I miss them so much, but I also don't want to leave you. Your family, your mum, your dad. You saved me in so many ways." On the veranda, a similar conversation was happening between the adults. "We can never thank you enough for taking care of Beatrice," Helen said, holding Claire's hands, "for keeping her safe, for helping to bring justice." "She's an extraordinary child," Claire replied, tears in her eyes. "She brought so much joy to our family. Matthew never had a friend like her. They're inseparable." A heavy silence followed, everyone aware of the dilemma they faced. Robert finally broke it. "We have a proposal," he said, looking at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "The house we bought is in Reading, less than an hour from here. Beatrice could, perhaps, continue attending the same school as Matthew. They could see each other on weekends, during holidays. And, in emergencies," Helen added with a small smile, "she could always stay with you, if you're willing, of course." Claire looked at Julian, hope blooming in her heart. "Like shared custody?" she suggested timidly. "It's not conventional," Robert admitted. "But nothing in our lives has been conventional lately. And after all we've been through, we've learned that family goes far beyond blood." "We accept," Julian declared without hesitation, surprising everyone with his readiness. The pragmatic judge, always cautious with decisions, didn't need time to consider this one. "If it's what Beatrice wants too." At that moment, as if they had overheard the conversation, the children appeared on the veranda. Bea looked anxiously from her parents to the Stones, clearly divided. "We have something to ask you, daughter," Robert said, making space for her to sit between him and Helen. They explained the proposal. Beatrice would live with her parents in Reading, but would maintain close contact with the Stones. She would attend the same school as Matthew, spend alternate weekends with each family, and they would all celebrate special dates together. "It would be like having 2 families, Helen summarized, carefully observing her daughter's reaction. Bea's face lit up, with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "That's exactly what Matthew suggested months ago," she exclaimed. "He said I wouldn't have to choose, that we could be 2 families who love each other very much." The adults looked at Matthew in surprise, who blushed intensely. "I just thought it would be a good idea," he mumbled, embarrassed. "And it was a brilliant idea," Julian praised with evident pride in his voice. "Worthy of a future judge." "Or a lawyer," Matthew added. "I haven't decided yet." Everyone laughed, the tension finally dissipating. They completed lunch with shared stories, plans for the future, and the feeling that despite all the obstacles and suffering, something extraordinarily beautiful had been born from adversity. A year later, Beatrice celebrated her 9th birthday with a big party at Willow Creek Farm. The 2 families, the Carters and the Stones, had become inseparable, forming a bond that transcended conventions. Beatrice's life was now divided between 2 loving homes. With her parents, she rediscovered family traditions and created new memories. With the Stones, she expanded her horizons, with Claire encouraging her artistic talent and Julian nourishing her inquisitive mind. And with Matthew, her best friend, brother at heart, adventure partner, she celebrated the simple miracle of being a child. At the party, amidst laughter and music, Julian observed the two families interacting naturally. Robert now worked as a first aid instructor, teaching underserved communities. Helen had returned to nursing at a hospital managed by a foundation created by Claire to improve medical care in disadvantaged areas. Julian himself, inspired by the courage of a 7-year-old girl, had become more active in social causes, using his influence to promote reforms in the judicial system and child protection. The Senator Monroe case had resulted in a wide investigation that exposed other corruption schemes and led to significant changes in legislation. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, approaching her husband with 2 glasses of lemonade. "About how destiny works in mysterious ways," he replied, accepting the drink. "A rainy night, a chance encounter with a little street girl, and our lives changed forever." Claire smiled, following her husband's gaze to where Bea and Matthew ran around the gift table, laughing heartily. "For the better," she completed. "For the better," Julian agreed, toasting with his wife. At the center of the party, Beatrice Carter, once a lonely girl fleeing shadows, now radiated the pure joy of a loved and secure child. Her eyes, once too ancient for her young face, now sparkled with regained innocence and the promise of a bright future. Around her neck hung a small blue pendant, the same one she had given Matthew that rainy night. The boy had insisted she keep it as a symbol of her incredible journey. "For good luck," he had said, repeating her words. But Beatrice knew, in her wise and young heart, that it wasn't luck that had brought her there. It was courage, persistence, and, above all, the ability to trust again, to allow her wounded heart to open to receive and give love, even after so much pain. And so, surrounded by her 2 families, one by blood, one by choice, Beatrice blew out the candles on the cake, making a wish that, for the first time in a long time, wasn't about survival or justice, but simply about joy and infinite possibilities. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Beatrice and Matthew's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on your left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of human connections. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and knowing which moment of this story moved you the most.